So we'll start. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this meeting. Today, we're going to talk about Priorat. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Miquel Hudin to this meeting. Miquel has published books featuring wine regions as far as wide as the Dalmatian coast of Croatia and Stellenbosch in South Africa. But in recent years, he's known primarily for his books about what nowadays is the home wine region of Priorat and the Catalan regions. And as well as that, he's a regular judge and a contributor for Decanter magazine, as well as the World of Fine Wine. He's a regular speaker in international wine conferences. It's worth mentioning that Miquel had started his wine career in his original county of Napa Valley. He's originally from California. It was in the Inglenook winery, if I'm right. And it's yeah. So without further ado, it's I'll pass you the microphone, and you can start.
All right. Yeah. Well, hello everyone. Hello in a very weird way, of course, as we're now in this period of isolation and talking through these kinds of weird things. I haven't done any of these chats so far. This is actually the first one that I'm going to be doing, and I don't know. We'll see how it goes. It might be the last one, but we'll see how it goes. Normally this time of year, I would be probably welcoming a lot of people down here to Priorat, and we'd be having a good time. We'd be drinking a lot of wine. Tomorrow would actually be our annual wine fair in Priorat. That was obviously canceled quite a while back. So we don't have that. We're missing out on a lot of activities, and we're missing out on a lot of visitors, which is a real shame because it's a really lovely place this time of year, and obviously the wines are really quite excellent as well. So there's a lot of familiar names that I've seen here popping up, and I know a lot of you already know Priorat pretty well. Some of you live here, but for some people who maybe there's some new names that I don't know there, I'm gonna go over a little bit of Priorat, just kind of do as much of an overview as possible to give people sort of an idea of kind of the basic gist of Priorat, because it always amazes me how many people don't actually know it, because once I found it, I couldn't let go of it, which is probably part of the reason that I actually live here now. So I think we'd probably just get started with where is Priorat? And I am going to attempt to share a screen bit here. Where did that go? Here we go. And so, yep, there we go. All right. I assume everybody can see that. Yeah, it's up?
Yeah, it's on.
All right.
Yeah.
So here we have this is basically the little triangular chunk of northeastern Spain. You'll often read a lot of articles where they say it's northwestern Spain. Obviously, it's the east. Up in the top there, that's the border with France, and Catalonia is this little bit over here on the edge of it. Obviously, it sees a little bit of news coverage these days because of the various events going on. It's a very distinct region from the rest of Spain. I mean, in general, Spain is actually a lot of very distinct regions, and has its own language, which is not a dialect of Spanish, as is often thought. It's very different from Spanish, actually. And here you see Barcelona down kind of in the middle of the coast there. And then Priorat is where the red dot is. So that's, depends on how you drive. You can make it here in an hour and a half to 2 hours. Used to be a lot more. Used to be pretty hairy to get over here because the old road was really twisty and curvy. As you go down the coast and everything is fine, you're just scooting along, and then you head up into the mountains and everything gets pretty crazy. But that's where Priorat is. If you don't know where Spain is, I can't help you too much, but I'm sure that Google Maps would be your best friend there. Let's see, I don't think this opens in order. No, of course not. There we go. So this is the little doinky region, actually is Priorat. It's made up of 12 villages, officially 11 in terms of political boundaries, but in terms of classifications, there are 12. And very small region. You know, if you go from top to bottom, I think it's maybe 20 kilometers or something like that, maybe about 12 across. and it's very small and compact, but it produces a lot of very interesting wines. And there are a lot of very individual, unique terroirs within here. And the villages have a distinct character, which is why they started breaking them up with this Vila Vila classification, which I'll get into. I'll probably get into all that at the very, very end, because whoever's hanging around is really, really diehard and really wants to know about that stuff. So otherwise, we'll just kind of keep it at this. I will be tasting. If you have the wines at home, you can taste along as well, but it's not really designed to be a virtual tasting. I have 3 wines here from 3 distinct villages. One is Belmunt del Priorat, which is in the very, very south there. It's the furthest south village in Priorat. Then another one is from Priorat, which is a bit up and onto the east there, kind of the middle of Priorat, but also very coastal influence. And the very last one is up from Escalade, probably at the very, very top, kind of the upper northern limit of vines for Priorat. And there we go. And this is what's distinct about Priorat. This is our soil. There's about 85% of the territory is made up of this slate. This is called Vicorella. It's a local name for the slate, the rocky schist that we have here, which is most of the region. There's different colors of it, there's different compositions, but this is pretty much it. And the vines grow right down into this soil, and it is just freaking crazy. I mean, you look at this and you think, how could anything grow out of that? But the vines do, and they sink their roots usually down up to about 10, 15 meters or so, or even a little bit more, to kind of be able to actually cling on to that. So that's a really defining part of Priorat. And then just to prove it, here are some vineyards growing in a very nice vineyard up in Priorat. This is called Mas de la Rosa. These are Cariñena vines. And this was just before a very, very pretty harvest in October. It's a very late harvesting grape. But you can see there that the vines, they just shoot out of the soil. And these are 100 plus years old. And they're still thriving, still producing enough grapes, and really, really lovely grapes. It goes into a wine of the same name. And here's a nice shot of the harvest. So that was pretty scenic. I hope everybody can see that well, because this is Priorat. We have some flat spots around here and there, but it's very, very hilly. It's a lot of slopes. These slopes here are called coustes. It's a Catalan name. It's the same word as côte in French, but it just means a slope. And we have them in varying degrees, from nice kind of gentle slope you can almost take a tractor on, to things like this, where if you slip and fall, you get pretty bruised up. And I've harvested this vineyard, and I have slipped and fell, and it's unpleasant. The ground is pretty unforgiving. These guys know what they're doing. They're going around doing all the hand harvesting, which is the regulation in Priorat. They're pulling it out 1 bucket at a time, and they're going to take it down to the winery. So it usually takes about 3 days to harvest this vineyard, and they kind of just sort of throw everybody that they have at it. So let me unshare this, get back to my beautiful face. There we go. So that's where Priorat's located. That's a bit of the soil. That's kind of what we have in terms of a makeup of sort of the overall scope of Priorat. Where did Priorat come from? Now the history goes back, 2,000 years or whatever. I'm going to just try and cover this as absolutely fast as I can. If you want more information, sorry, Moshé, I'm going to do this. I have a book. I have an excellent book. He has it too. Everybody should have this book if you like Priorat. But that's my plug. So it has a lot more details on the history there. And so basically, the old history is that the Romans were probably in this area, as they were in a lot of the Mediterranean. Do we have any proof that they're making wine here? Not so much, as opposed to like Barcelona. If you go to the City History Museum in Barcelona, it's super cool because you can go downstairs into a basement, and they actually have old amphoras where they were actually making the wine. So we know they're making in Barcelona. In Priorat, not so sure, but there's a good chance of it. Then you get into the Moorish period, obviously no wine production. Then you get into the Reconquest, where things start to get a bit more interesting. Because after the Reconquest of Spain, the monks came down from Chartreuse, from the Chartreuse order, and they established a monastery in Priorat, and that's kind of the start of the period that we have here. So the monastery they established is called La Cartocha. And it was from this period where wine production got a bit more serious, and also the region itself started to take a lot more shape. So we have the name Priorat. What does that mean? Well, in English, it means priory. So, that's directly where the name comes from. And it's thanks to the monks and this dominion of this monk that really formed the core part of Priorat. And I know a lot of people are probably aware of Dion-Monsant as well. This is also in the county of Priorat, which is a bigger region, but it's this core historic region of about 12 villages or so that is considered to be the original Priorat. And that's where the DOQ is based, in those core villages. So the monks were here. They had a pretty good run. They made it about 600 years or so. And then there were the Decrees of Municipal, which was an order by the Spanish kingdom for the religious orders to get the hell out. And that was in 1835. Things changed quite a bit at that point. Where the monks were gone, people started taking over and having ownership of their own land. And then there was another thing that happened. For those of you who live up in France, especially up in south of France, you've heard of this thing called phylloxera, which came through France, killed off the vines. And so then the French were looking for a source of wine, and they found it in Spain. Ironically, this continues today. Spain is a big source of bulk wine up to France. And so we see during this period, the later part of the 19th century, we see a lot of export up to France. On the kind of the middle part of Spain, you saw it out of Rioja, which is the kind of the foundation of the town Otto, not Hotto, not the H. H is silent, it's Otto. But that became a real point for wine to be shipped up to Bordeaux, up to France on that side. Here, that same kind of point became Reus. So Reus is it's a nice town, but it really blew up in terms of population in the later 19th century, because it was the point where they were shipping all of the wine up to the Rhone Valley, and who knows, maybe a little bit up to Burgundy to kind of fatten it up those days. And the consequence of that was that Reus grew quite a bit, and then there was a really big boom of the vermouth industry as well. So they were producing a lot of vermouth. They still produce a lot of vermouth today, not nearly as much as they used to. If you haven't had some vermouths from Reus, those are really worth seeking out, and there's a lot of really good vermouth produced there. So another little good side bit that happened there. After phylloxera, you get the cooperatives forming. This is something we see throughout all of Europe, kind of safety in numbers sort of thing, sharing the cost, making wine. Probably pretty shitty wine, to be quite honest. I mean, they're producing it in big underground vats. It was probably oxidized. They're just kind of taking everything, and there wasn't really a lot of sorting. So, it is what it is. The DO itself was actually established in 1954. So for Spain, that's kind of old. It's actually a pretty old DO in Spain. The oldest, if there's always kind of a battle between Rioja and Sherry, but I'm going with Sherry, as far as they've told me. That seems to be the oldest, and Sherry is just ancient as well. I mean, they've been making wine there forever. So you have this DO established, still allowed to kind of produce wine in bulk and sell it that way. And then there are a couple of events that came along, which actually I'll cover probably a little bit more with the wine. There's the Cartocha that was released in '74 from Scala, which helped reestablish that really quality wine could be made in Priorat. Then a group of kind of hippies and misfits and some other kind of oddballs, and it's the collection of people who came along in the 80s with René Barbier are really an odd group. There were some people who were really dedicated in wine. Those are the ones who stuck around. And the other ones, didn't really work out. But in 1989, they released a wine, which was the Clos wine. And that wine really is what put Priorat back on the map, because that was the point where you had the Robert Parkers out there and the other big critics. Are there any other big critics? I mean, it's just pretty much Parker. No, I mean, he was kind of establishing everything. No one, don't tell anyone else I said that. But at this point, Parker and I'm sure a couple of others, they started really taking notice of Priorat in the 90s. Was when this Clos wine came out, and this is where there was a big push for wine production in the region. What happened after that? After this group, who everybody refers to as the Cinco Magnificos or the Cinque Magnifics, or the Five Magnificents, which is, and if you ask any of them about this name, they're actually kind of patently embarrassed by it. because it was this name given at the, for restarting the region and bringing it back and from a non-existence. I mean, when Renee, sorry, yeah, go ahead, Moshé.
Miquel, just to stop you there, because we were discussing a couple of days ago about the fact that even I got it wrong with René Barbier being an outsider, and you corrected me. So it's worth just maybe just telling people he wasn't an outsider, and also who are the five, if you can highlight that.
So the five, and there actually were 10, but it's just the five who were able to keep going and produce wine. The keystone in there is René Barbier. Everyone says senior, but actually it's René Barbier the third, because then there's his son, René Barbier, as well, who's also making wine with his wife, Sarah Perez, and eventually he's going to be taking over Clos Mogolo. So you had René Barbier with Clos Mogolo, very well known, very respected. I mean, I think everyone who comes to Priorat goes to Clos Mogolo. You have Mas Martinet, which went through a generational change about 20 years ago. I saw Sarah Perez, she came in on the chat here recently, so I'll speak nicely, but it's not hard because I love the wines of Mas Martinet. And so, but her dad, Josep Luis Perez, he was the engine behind that, as well as Sarah's mom. She was also Montse Ovejo. She was also really, really important, and she's a scientist, and she's super cool as well. And then you had Clos Tofi, Palacios. A lot of people, if you're in the United States, and if you tried Priorat, there's a good chance it was probably Palacios. He really set out and established a good presence in the U.S., and he's really well known. He has the most expensive wine in Priorat, and I think almost in Spain, the Ermita, which is pretty impressive wine. We can get a bit more into that at the end when talking about single vineyards and such. And then there was Clos Obach, which is Carlos Pastrana. And lastly in there was Clos Erasmus, which is Daphne Glorian, who is super awesome, and someone I chat with a lot whenever she's here, because she's actually lives in, I want to say it's North Carolina. I think she lives in Charlottesville. I always get it wrong. But her husband is Eric Solomon, who's a super awesome importer in the U.S. And she always jokes that Eric just married her to be able to get an allotment of Clos Erasmus. But she then, of course, jokes that he then, of course, says that she only married him so that she could have a constant distributor in the U.S. So But yeah, Daphne's great, and her wine is really great. Every year is very different, but it's always a stupendous wine that she makes. So that's the five, and they have continually been making wine since 1989. The original group, when they released the wine, it was all just a single wine released with their individual names on it. And fun fact, it was not actually Dio Priorat, because Dio Priorat, the minimum percentage for red wine is 13.5% alcohol. That wine was 12.5%. So it was actually Vino de España. So this wine that put Priorat back on the map was technically not even Priorat. I mean, the idea of being able to make a 12.5% alcohol wine these days is pretty kind of blows your mind, because there's a lot to deal with here in terms of climate change. But that was the main group, and they're the ones who did a lot of work to not just make the wines and deal with living here, because it was pretty tough to live here 30 years ago. But they also did a lot of work to promote the wines and get the region more well known and attract other people to the party, because you're obviously not going to start a movement with just 5 people. And today there's about 110 wineries in Priorat and about another 50 in Monsanto, which is not bad for a pretty small little region like this. So yeah, was another part to the question, Moshé, or did?
No, it's obviously an important part of the recent history. So I think it's important that everybody get that kind of understanding of who they were. And in a minute, I'm sure that you'll cover how they branched and their influence nowadays, but we'll get to it.
Yeah, so after this group, a lot of family wineries started up. Because to that point, people were pretty much just selling wine bulk. You could go up to Barcelona and you would go into a restaurant or a wine shop there, and there'd be a barrel that said, Priorat across it, and you take out 1 or 5-liter jug or something of it, and that was Priorat not too long ago. Things have changed significantly, but there was initially this push by family wineries to get established and produce really higher quality wines. They pulled out of the cooperatives in the process, and then all of the cooperatives have collapsed, and the 4 that were remaining have combined down into one cooperative that still exists in Priorat. Monsanto still has a big cooperative presence in it. About 55% of the wine is produced by cooperatives in Monsanto, but things are changing there as well. And so you had the family wineries, and then you get people who came in starting in the early 2000s with a lot more money, building some pretty impressive structures and really kind of making some crazy vineyards. And of course, then what do we have in 2008? Everything just kind of goes, in 2008, 2009, we're sort of seeing a repeat of that right now, because obviously everybody who makes wine is not doing so well. And we'll see how that goes. But as a note, so you'll see that Priorat is DOQ Priorat, but back in 1954, it was just DO Priorat. It was in 2000 that the Catalan authorities raised it to this extra high level that we have here in Spain of DOQ, DOC in Spanish. And then it was in 2009, it was approved by the Spanish authorities and became officially a DOQ. So, and there's just 2 of them. There's just Priorat and there's Rioja. There was some talk of Ribera del Duero maybe doing it or some other ones, but no one has panned out onto it. So it's just pretty much stuck with these 2.
Miquel, just 1 second. There's a couple of questions that came in now from Liz Gabay, MW, asking, what is the average size of the vineyard?
The average size of the vineyard? I have no idea. It's just the problem is there's so many of them. I think there's maybe someone else could probably answer this who's more involved in the technical side of things. I think there's something like...
Sarah is here with us. I think you unmuted. So hello, Sarah.
Hello.
Maybe you can tell us if you know the average size.
At the end of the 80s, they raised just around 800 hectares of really old vineyard, just planted post-phylloxeric. So from the 80s to nowadays, we have been planting around 1,400 hectares. Mm-hmm. So now it's maybe 1/3 more than 60 or 70 years old, 1/3 around 30, 40, and 1/3 less than 30.
And the average size of a plot, if there is such a thing?
This is it's very difficult because Priorat is like, a difficult orography. So it's not more than 1 hectare, it's 1 hectare, less than 1 hectare, 1 hectare point something, then a little bit of forest or,
And I know there's big variations. Miquel will probably touch on it in a minute. Somebody else was asking about the average hectoliter per hectare or yield, but we normally measure it in hectoliter per hectare. And maybe you can, Miquel, get us back to the yield, the average yield.
It's, what is it, Reds? It's 6,000 kilograms per hectare, because we talk in kilograms per hectare, not per hectoliters here. 6,000 for the Reds, I believe 8,000 for the whites. Sarah can correct me on that because she has to deal with this.
Well, this is the maximum, but this is
that's
not
the maximum.
average.
Yeah.
This is the maximum. But in 2,000 hectares, we are making 4 million kilograms, more or less. I mean, it's like around 2,000 kilos hectare per average, and that means 1,500 liters
per hectare.
This is the average. So, well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people like to talk in terms of how much you get per plant, because you saw with those, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry. So in term, you saw those plants up there on the slope in Massa Rosa, they'll usually kind of talk about how much yield per plant. I think most people are going to be topping out about 1.2 kilos per plant. Keep in mind, that's what you need to make a whole bottle. But the reality of it is that those are trellis vines, those are more fertile areas, and it drops down to half that or to a quarter of that. And so some of the old vines are getting 300 grams only per vine. So while there are some larger vineyards around, like in the flatter part down by the Siurana River at the bottom of Priorat, you know, and their trellis, and they have a higher, maybe they have a bit more higher production. Overall, everybody is seeing very, very few grapes, and the yields are extremely small. I don't know. I mean, you probably, some of them you're seeing maybe 1,000 kilos per hectare, or even less. You know, and there's some tiny little vineyards you find, just kind of a little strip that's been handed down in the family, which is 0.1 hectares or something. On the slopes, they're very, very small. And finding anything on a slope that's above 1 or 2 hectares at most is pretty rare. So you know, it's very small agriculture here. It's very labor intensive, and I think there were a lot of people, especially in the 2000s, that got attracted here because they saw that, you know, these wines were selling for a lot in Barcelona, and you know, people were making good money. And then they got down here, and you know, it's extremely labor intensive. I've made wine here, and so I you know, on a personal level, not as a real serious project. And it's very hard to actually produce a bottle for less raw cost than like 6 or 7 euros. You know, that's kind of your very, very low cost of production. And so obviously, if that's your main, your base price, your wholesale price is going to be double that. Your retail price is going to be quadruple that. So, you know, people aren't getting rich. The last I checked, René Barbier isn't, you know, he doesn't have a helicopter or a Ferrari. You know, Sarah has a pretty cool car that she cruises around in, but it's, you know, it's an old classic. So you know, people don't get rich here. They survive. They do well. They're happy making the wines. Sarah's husband told me once, she goes, you know, you don't come to Priorat to get rich. You come to Priorat to make the best wine that you can possibly make. So, you know, I think that's the case.
Miquel, Alfonso from the steep slopes of the Amalfi Coast is asking, is growing an organic vineyard there, is asking about the how much of the production is organic.
They don't keep track of those. I mean, they probably have these exact figures somewhere in the DOQ, but they don't make them as public like they do with Penedès. I don't know. I don't have an exact figure. All the people that I generally talk to are working organic. Sarah, for example, everything is organic. Other people are in a process of a conversion, like a good friend of mine, Albert Costa, who's the co-owner of Bayac. He's about 80% organic. There are other people who are working biodynamically as well. An exact figure is very hard to come by because there's still a lot of old school production. You can walk through the vineyards and you see that all the organic matter is dead in the vineyard. So there still are some people doing, let's say, a less modern type of production, traditional, I guess is what people like to call it. But it definitely does exist. But organic is definitely growing. And you saw that soil. I mean, when you have soil that's just a pile of rocks, you don't have to do too much to it. And also, Priorat is extremely dry. We're usually looking at about somewhere around 30% humidity normally. So you don't have fungal problems, and you're not going to have a lot of pests. And they are here, but having to do what they do in, say, like Bordeaux isn't really the case. So even if you're using herbicides and pesticides, it's at a massively reduced amount than other regions. So
I suppose it's it's harder because when the vineyards look like that, it's not that easy to get out to the vineyard on a tractor. Obviously, most of them are everything is manual. So it's a case of the choice is easy to go organic, even if you're not certified, because somebody was asking about certified or not. But so I'm sure that a lot are not certified, but fully organic.
Yeah, and I mean, another thing too is there are people who just work with it as their philosophy, but aren't really pushing an agenda of trying to sell that way. Like Clos Morgado is that way. I didn't know they were biodynamic until maybe about a year ago, because they just don't make a big deal about it. They don't put it on the labels. It's just the philosophy. And so, you know, that there are probably a few other people who are like this. Let's see this there. I think Rupert was asking a question about common misconceptions and errors made about Priorat.
Yes,
I like this question because there probably are quite a few. I think one of the biggest problems with it is how it gets listed in a lot of educational text. There's sort of that little one paragraph summary, which is, slate soils, slopes, high alcohol, Spain. And so, some of that's true. Obviously, Catalonia is still in Spain. But the high alcohol part, there are definitely boozy wines here. Grenache is 40% of the production. And Grenache can go up to 18% without really having to do too much work to get it there. And obviously that's not what you want. But things are changing a lot these days, and seeing wines that are more at the minimum, even 13.5% up to about 14.5. Usually most wines are below 15 these days. So I think that the perception that Priorat is just big, boozy, alcoholic wines is something that has changed significantly. And I think if people, the last time they tasted it was maybe 10 years ago or even more, that they should maybe look into it a bit more. So that's one common misconception. I think the other one is that Carignana is, I'll get into the grapes next, but one of them is that the Carignana is not a grape for making monovarietal wines. It's just for blending. So not true. Carignana is just freaking awesome. It's one of my most favorite grapes that there is. If you've looked at my website, you see that I'm kind of a bit of a fanatic about it and sort of chase it all over wherever I can find it. Because when it's made well, it's really good. But Grenache is definitely the star. It's really the main wine here. And I think probably one of the, there's always, people will see pictures of Priorat and have some idea of what it is, but until you actually come here, you don't really fully know what Priorat is like. And it's just these folded valleys and everything goes up and down in the elevation. And it's so strange because you can come to Falset, which is the capital of the region. It's right next to where the train station arrives. And you're at 400 meters. And then you're driving along, you get to Sarah's winery. And you think, okay, we're down in a valley. Yeah, okay, it's lower. And then you get up to Grate-Alpes, which is a very scenic village up on a hilltop. And you think like, wow, we've scaled the mountain, we're up at the top. And then no, you're lower than Falset. So it's a very strange place. And once this whole thing that we're going through is over, I really recommend that anybody who hasn't been here definitely to come here and see it for themselves and kind of taste the wines in situ and sort of see what Priorat actually has to offer. And it's changed a lot as well. It used to be the case 15 to 20 years ago that there was not really anywhere to stay and some pretty basic food options. But a lot of that has changed. We have some really great restaurants. Hopefully we're going to make it through this period and some nice hotels to stay at as well. And so it's actually gotten a lot more fun to visit Priorat as well. And beyond that, I think probably one of the only things that still drives me just a little bit crazy is when I see some article somewhere and somebody writes Priorato, which is the Spanish spelling, sticking this O at the end of it, because nobody labels their wine Priorato here. Even people who are full Spanish speakers who've come to the region still call it Priorat. It's just, that's just the name at this point. So, and then there's probably a little bit of misunderstanding as well in terms of the village level classification. But like I said, I'll get to that at the end if people are still awake. So, I don't know, what other questions we have here?
Miguel was telling us about loss of Garnacha last year because of variations in temperature, but I think maybe we can arrive at the discussion about global warming maybe later on and mention that. Yeah, because it's definitely a point worth mentioning. But we threw you completely out of the presentation there with the questions, but it's good. People keep asking questions. Miquel likes the questions coming in, but one of the last points.
No, go ahead.
No, you mentioned the 2008 crisis, and I made a point from your book, I quote because it's chillingly suitable for these days. You write about the 2008 crisis that if Priorat is anything, it's resilient, and most likely this is just one storm that will pass its strong hills throughout the centuries. So it's again, I wanted to ask, how do you see the current crisis, although we're in the midst of it, compared to the 2008 crisis? But maybe again, we'll reach that later on. You can keep it and continue with the presentation, or
well, I think it plays into the history a bit, so I can mention it now. I mean, basically, Priorat has seen some shit. You know, this was just right next to the Ebro River, and so there was fighting just right near here during the Civil War. You go into some of the cellars in the lower part of the county, and they still have bullet holes in the walls. So, you know, the Civil War was super rough. The phylloxera crisis was super rough to Priorat. It's just been through so many ups and downs just in recent history, in addition to the fact it's a very hard place to live in historically. I mean, the village of Purera, which is gorgeous. I lived there for 2 years, and you know, it's a beautiful village down inside of a valley, and a lot of really ambient life there, and it's a lot of fun to live there. And you have it. Yes, that's your wine. And I have one as well. But you know, that name means the translation of it is fear is behind us. So it was called the Scary Valley in Catalan before people started living there. And once people settled in it, then they said fear is behind us. So Priorat has been a very, very tough place to live in. I think the big difference between now and this whole crisis and the lockdown and everything is affecting us kind of all in a similar way, and that it's just paralyzed everything. The difference with the previous crisis was that it just was for, you know, it was for a set amount of time, and it wasn't like the whole place was shut down, so people could still come and visit. You know, not a lot of people were visiting, but the wines were still selling a certain amount, so there's still movement, even if it was heavily reduced. The big difference now is that it's, I think Sarah, I think you want to mute Sarah.
okay.
She's come back on there. I think the big difference now is just that everything is shut down. We've been on a really nice upswing. Everything's been building. We had like a really super great 5-star hotel just opened up about a year ago. And so everything was kind of really moving up, and it would probably hit a point like, well, it depends on how long this goes on as to how long everything can last. And as someone's commented there, you know, I think a lot of people, I've seen them come down, you know, they come out of, like, they hire a limo or something to come down from Barcelona, and they step out and they're all kind of dressed up like they're going to Napa Valley or something. And everyone's sort of a hick here, you know, everybody's just sort of dressed for working in the field. It's very, very rural. And it's a very small amount of tourism. There just really aren't a lot of tourists. You can drive around at harvest time and be the only car on the road. So it's still very empty. The whole county only has 9,000 people in it. And so it's a very remote, depopulated space, even though it's just over the hill, just 20 kilometers east of here is the beach, you know, and massive tourism development, but it's a very, very different world from all of that. So, and again, that's one of those things that it's very hard to sort of understand until you've actually come here and seen it. And you're just like, shh, you know, what, is there something going on? It's a holiday. It's like, no, it's just always like that. There's nobody around, you know, and that's kind of a nice charm to it as well. Should I do a little overview of the various grapes, or okay? Yeah.
Yes, because I think it's important. Sorry, I know that Garnacha, for instance, has two very different Garnacha growing. So I think it's important to highlight that.
Yeah, I think Garnacha is really finding its own pace here in Spain. Thankfully, it's a great grape. It's a delicious grape. It could obviously historically be very alcoholic and very oxidated, you know, which is not pleasant drinking. But the new trends with Garnacha here in Spain are completely the opposite of that. You see over in the Gredos region that they're really coming down on alcohol. They're making very light, very delicate wines. And you're seeing that to some extent here in Priorat as well. I mean, this is very much the heart of Garnacha country here. And you're seeing wines that are lighter profile and easier drinking. It's still going to have some, you know, some oomph to it. You know, Priorat, it's difficult to make a really low alcohol wine without losing a lot of the character. There are some people who are trying, but it's, you know, that it's a core part of the foundation here. So so we have red and white grapes, obviously. White is a very small amount of production. It's only about 6%. But it is growing. Maybe about, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, that was only about 4%. So you're seeing a lot more white grapes. But I'll get into those in a second. In terms of the reds, Garnacha is 40% of production. Maybe it's a little bit more. I don't have the most recent figures from the DOQ. And then, it's, it has a lot of appeal to it. A good friend of mine, Freddy Torres, he basically describes Garnacha as a puti club, which I think puti club is, let's give the nicest translation of that, as a strip club. It's a lot of fun. It's very enjoyable to drink. There's a lot of flexibility to Garnacha. I mean, you see it in a lot of different forms. You see it in sweet wines up in France. We have some of those here as well. You see it in oxidized format. You see it in rosés. I mean, it makes super rosé. And so Garnacha really has, I see Liz there. She she has a rosé. So, I mean, she's up in the heart of rosé country up there in Provence. But the Garnacha is great. I think everyone's really gotten a hold of Garnacha both in Spain and in France, and it's not this rustic, just kind of crap filler grape that it might have been 30, 50 years ago or whatever. Then you got about 20% of the plantings are Cariñena. So, and I was talking about Cariñena before. Cariñena is, it's not a strip club so much. I think of it more as kind of a smoking lounge. It's a kind of a more seductive sort of laid back kind of grape. It will not get as alcoholic as Garnacha. You can make it. I mean, if you really want to, you can make an alcoholic Cariñena. But usually it kind of peaks up around 14.5%, sometimes 15 in a hot year, and it kind of hangs out there. And then it has a super long maturation period, usually picking it kind of mid-October or even into early November in some of the plots. That's a little bit different than what you find in France, where usually they're kind of picking it by the end of September. So here they give it a lot more hang time, and it really becomes a big, voluptuous, crazy grape. And I've tasted Cariñena from all over Spain, France, Israel, Morocco, California, Chile, and there are some people making some really excellent wines out there, especially from Maule. I mean, they just super incredible Cariñenas they're making there. But in terms of probably this point, this kind of just super amazing, delicate transcendence that Cariñena can reach, I find that there's basically 2 points in Catalunya that really, really do it well, and one is Priorat, and the other one is Empordà, up by the French border. And it's for the same reason. You're about 20 kilometers from the sea. There's a lot of slate soils, a lot of old vines, very different style of wine, but they're both producing really, really nice varietal wines from Cariñena. So those are the two main grapes, and that's the two blends you're going to find. One of the wines that I have here is a 50-50 blend. The other one is 100% Garnacha. The other one I have is a white, so that's a little bit different. And I'll get to those in a minute. But after Garnacha and Cariñena, then you kind of have this big medley of grapes, and some of them, there's a few more than other ones. You have Syrah. Syrah is good. We're happy with Syrah. Syrah is nice. We've got, we got a good deal of Syrah. We have Tempranillo, which isn't so amazing. Picapol Negra, Cabernet Franc, Pinot Noir. There's like 500 kilograms of Pinot Noir that comes in. It's just one thing. It was kind of experimental, but somebody has it. And then you have Cabernet Sauvignon. And Cabernet Sauvignon sucks. It's Cabernet Sauvignon in Priorat is like that really crappy uncle that everybody has who shows up to family gatherings, and he's not so great when he arrives. And by the time he leaves, he's drunk, and he's even worse. And that's Cabernet Sauvignon in Priorat. You basically, if you pick it when it's, not too alcoholic, it's super green and it's difficult. If you wait for full phenolic maturity, it's going to be super boozy and alcoholic. It's going to be raisinning. It's going to be having tons of fungal problems as well, because the clusters are tight on it here. And there's one friend of mine who has a not huge amount, but a decent amount of it. And he says, what if that vineyard that he has it in had been planted with something else, as opposed to the Cabernet Sauvignon, he wouldn't be losing 5,000 kilos of grapes a year. So it's really a problematic grape, and slowly more and more people are changing over, regrafting it or tearing it out and replanting it. So it's, I think, thankfully on the way out, as well as Cabernet Franc, which, you know, so these don't work well. Merlot is all right though, you know, so that's, you know, that works well to kind of take the edge off of the Grenache a little bit. So whites, we have a big kind of mess of things. I won't get into all of it. Basically, just to say that Garnacha Blanca and Macabeo are the two main grapes. So those are the primary ones that you find in the whites. You know, there's a couple of others that people have been working with, like Vineyard, Xarel·lo, which is usually up in Penedès, and a few others. There's a lot of experimentation happening in the whites, and there's some cool stuff that's starting to come out in the whites. And I think there's really a big turning point in 2014 in terms of the whites, where that was a very damp, difficult year, but it was just super awesome for the whites. Most all the whites I've seen come out of 14 are delicious. I mean, they have great acidity to them, lower alcohol. And that point forward, I think the whites for the last, you know, 5 vintages have been really, really good. Any questions on grapes? Trying to see.
Joe was asking about the kind of history of the international grape varieties, and where do you see if there's a bigger role or just a similar role for international grape varieties, particularly about Syrah, he was asking.
So Syrah, again, I don't have the most recent figures. I think Syrah is somewhere around, I want to say 10-12% of the total plantings. It's definitely has strong representation. So there's, you know, Syrah is well liked. There's a couple of varietal wines produced out of Syrah as well. So it does well here. You know, it's a good grape in Priorat. Obviously, the tendency should be more to use Grenache and Carignan.
Right.
So wait, uh-oh, who's that? Okay. Hello, Marcus. So there's. So anyways, I think the thing of the international grapes is they arrived when it wasn't just this group who came in the 80s that brought the international grapes with them. They were already starting to be planted before that, because it was just the tendency in Spain. You see it a lot more in Penedès. You know, you see old international grape varieties like Cabernet and other ones in you know, up in that region going back 30-40 years or something, or in Bordeaux at the French border. But people have realized that these are not necessarily the best grapes in terms of blends. They're not necessarily the best grapes for the region, and with climate change, they're getting even worse. So there's been a lot of moves to get rid of the international varieties. That said, in terms of the whites, they're kind of working well. Like someone just said, like Chenin Blanc is surprisingly good here. Viognier has done pretty well also in Priorat, but at the higher altitudes. And that's really a key in terms of the future, is planting high and planting north facing to really kind of allow, so you can, you know, allow the grapes to actually succeed. But that's, yeah, so those are the grapes, and that's what people have to work with. It's not a bad selection. And I think people are doing some really nice things with those grapes as well, experimenting with some other ones, like one called Escandinavia, which is a local grape that is hopefully someday going to be approved, because it means it has like probably the best name I can think of for a grape, which is Old Lady Strangler. I mean, that's a pretty kick-ass name for a grape, Old Lady Strangler, you know? So that one is really fit for the region. It's a local grape. It's from here as far as we know. Hopefully we'll see more of it. There's only one person, there's 2 people doing majority Scandinavian wines, but hopefully there'll be some more. I see that Claudia has a question about classic and modern style of Priorat. I think that's best to get into with the wines, because that was sort of the idea with the wines that I chose, was to kind of talk a little bit about where Priorat has been and where it's going. So I don't know if anybody else had any other questions. I think, okay, Liz Gabby, she's asking, no, it's Escandinavia, that's in Catalan. It's
Catalan? It's in Catalan.
It's in Catalan. Escanya Vella. I can send you an email or right. Something. Yeah, there we go. There, correct. Yeah, which, I mean, it literally means like strangle old lady, which is, you know, or choke old lady as well. Is flexible, but it's pretty wicked. So, yeah, let's get on to the wines. Well, I can get on the wines. So you guys can do whatever you want.
Well,
First one I have here. Yeah.
if sorry, go
No,
ahead
go
with
ahead.
describing. No, I wanted to say, people are welcome to write in the chat if they're drinking Priorat, or for that matter, anything else. If they want to highlight what they're drinking, feel free to share with us. But and I'll let you present the white wine there.
All right. So I don't have just any white wine. I have one from 2004, this is from Gran Clos. This is the winery that was down in Belmonte Priorat. So a very warm region, but a very classic style of wine. So basically, it's about 75% white Grenache and 25% Macabeo. And that's it. Vinified with oak aging. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, you can see can you see the color? Yeah, look at that. Yeah, it's not amber wine, but it's damn close, isn't it? But that's pretty typical of sort of the aged white. But it's amazing. I mean, it has so much dried fruit in it, and it's, you know, and it's a little kind of caramelized orange peel and stuff. I mean, it's just all kind of tertiary notes. And it's a super aged wine, but it's, you know, it's quite impressive what it does. But that's pretty typical of what you found back in the early 2000s. You're going to find wines that were more heavily oak aged. I mean, what does this have for alcohol? Yeah, 15%. You know, so anybody who's kind of out looking for a Pinot Grigio replacement probably wouldn't be looking for this. You know, this is going to be a bit of a different style of wine. But it's what Priorat was making. You still find some of these kind of older, more sort of oxidative style wines in existence. I think someone who's doing a really good job of sort of clinging to the old style while still making it modern is Terroir Limit. Terroir Limit, I absolutely love their white wines. And I'm trying to remember which one it was, Terra Cucas or Pedreguiche. I think it's Pedreguiche that has sort of an oxidative style to it. But it's this idea to kind of capture the past and capture sort of this older style of Priorat with the wine. And I think it works really well. You know, you get into a weird thing with oxidative whites because it's not necessarily everybody's cup of tea. I mean, again, if you like Pinot Grigio, if you want something just kind of fruity, if you want like a Riesling, if you want, I don't know, if you want Chardonnay, you know, from like a Chablis or something, it's going to throw you back a bit, which is really weird because I think for the last month or something, my wife and I have been seeing, or the last 2 weeks, we've been seeing the Viña Tondonia from Rioja everywhere. It's like everybody is drinking Viña Tondonia right now, which is super awesome. I mean, they need to sell it, and it's a super incredible wine, but I can't believe there's that many people who like it so much because it's really pretty polemic. And it's something similar with this, you know, it's, I love this. I think it's really super interesting kind of wine, but it represents what everyone was doing back in 2004 or before. You know, you taste some of these older wines. I think Albert Costa, he was doing a chat last night, and he opened up a 1996 Cims de Porrera, which was back when his family was still part of the project before they formed Bayac. And if I remember correctly, I think Sarah was the winemaker back in 96. Am I right on that? Maybe. But, you know, everyone who's making the lighter, kind of newer style of fresher sort of Priorat wines, you know, people were making a heavier, more oaky wine back in those days. Now, obviously, that's starting to go out of style. And I don't think a lot of us are really missing it. But the thing is, when you have some of these old wines, they're pretty impressive. You know, they've aged really, really well. And I think someone there's a family, which is San Genesi Vaque in Prera, they do a really good job of aging the wines. You know, they see a lot of oak in their top two wines, but then they hold them back for 8-10 years before releasing them. And so they've really seen a lot of bottle age, and they're really nice and rounded, and the tannins are integrated. So there is a place for that style, but I don't think that it's something that can exist very well in the current market where people aren't going to bottle age or do what they do with Bordeaux, where you hold it in bond for 10 years or whatever. So things have changed quite a bit. And it was a nice period of Priorat, and it's where Priorat really grew quite heavily. and it's interesting tasting stuff from the old, these old days. Has anybody else tasted anything? Let's see, Patrick, he's got Black Slate Priorat 2015. That's a nice wine. You've got the Bila Bila, which again is from 14. I've got a 14 as well, but a very, very different wine than what you have, Moshé. Who else do we have here? We have someone who's avoiding drinking for 3 or 4 nights a week. That's fair enough.
Paul Kendall was saying that the color of the wine reminded him of V. Rancy. So I hope that you'll have time to tell us about the so-called Rancy wine of Priorat.
The rancid wine, yeah.
Rancid.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, that's something that it's probably even more of an acquired taste if you've never had it before. I remember the first time I had it, I just went, what the hell is this? Because yeah, the problem was the one that I tasted was actually still in progress. It takes minimum, I mean, if you're starting a new Biranci, it takes probably minimum 5-8 years or something to get going, and they really don't kind of hit their stride until maybe 20-30 years out. That's a pretty long time to wait. Yeah, Miguel is saying that Sarah has a spectacular Biranci, and it's true, but it's a different style. It's a Biranci dos, which is a sweet Biranci, which some people like a bit better in the region because the sweetness sort of takes a bit of the edge of the Biranci off. But Biranci is, I mean, it's literally what the name sounds like. It's rancid wine. It's wine that has sat in a barrel or in a demijohn or some other way, usually up in the attics of the houses, and it stays up there for ever, and they go and just take a little bit off during holidays or what have you, and then they fill it back up a little bit, but it's intentionally given a bit of space for oxygen, for oxidation, and that's it. And it's incredibly simple in terms of what it is. It's just it takes an incredible amount of time, and you need to have good wine going into it. And it's pretty traditional around Priorat, and not just Priorat, but also Montsant, Terra Alta, Empordà, you find it up in the Roussillon, you find it as well. And it's a pretty unique wine, which I recommend anybody at least try. But I think actually Scalade, they have one. I don't know if they're going to release it soon, but I have tasted they have a Biranci as well, which is pretty tasty. But it's maybe going to be a bit of an acquired taste. Really great at the end of the meal, having it with a bit of nuts and dessert. And this is a dessert called a muzik, which is pretty traditional and really, really, really tasty. But I mean, I can't describe Biranci really. You kind of have to taste it to experience it. And we're not drinking. I mean, this would be, I don't know, like 3 servings of Biranci. If you drink a very, very small amount of it, it's not something you're just sitting there pounding because it's pretty potent. And so, Paul is saying they have the labels for the Biranci, so it is coming. But it's one of these things where it's just it takes years and years to kind of release it, but you're like, not yet. You have to be sure of it. So it's really it's a unique wine. And here in Priorat, usually made with a base of Garnacha. And Terra Alta, they use Garnacha Blanca because that's their main grape, but it's kind of whatever you have laying around. Up in Roussillon, they use quite a bit of Macabeo. So, it's just sort of whatever you got, you can toss into a barrel and keep filling it up. So let's see, what do we have? Close to Taval. Okay, good. Yeah. All right. I think, because we're already at 8, I'll move on to the next wine. So I think I'll finish up the white here a little bit later. That's some good drinking. So we move on to Mr. Idus. Now this, I don't know, is that better? People can actually see what it is? Yeah, so this is from Bayak. This is the Idus. This is their mid-range wine. And it is, I think, most every year it's a 50-50 blend of Garnacha and Cariena. And it's stayed pretty consistent in terms of the style. It seems a bit of barrel aging. I think what's great about this wine, it's a 2017 as well. I think it represents really kind of this point where we've been at in Priorat for maybe the last 10 years or so, really honoring Garnacha and Cariena, really embracing those grapes, working with them in a way so that it's not just kind of booming alcohol. It is 15.5%, which is not a surprise because 17 was a pretty warm year. But 17s are, I think you'll probably find a lot of them on the market right now. This you can buy directly from the seller if you're in Spain, but you will find it in other places. And it's really, It's really, really great wine in terms of sort of being in the midpoint of their overall range of wines. And I don't know, I feel like Albert should talk about this a bit, because this is an interesting wine because it's the only one they have where they buy in all the grapes from it, because Baillac is very focused on being a communal winery. It's like it was founded as being a social project because the two original founders don't really drink. One doesn't drink at all. He's completely teetotal, which is Lluís Llach, who, if you're not from Catalonia, Lluís Llach is sort of like the Bob Dylan of Catalonia. He's a tremendous figure here, and he's been singing in Catalan ever since it was illegal, and he's now in politics, and he's been well established. And he started this winery mainly because his mother was from Priorat, and he wanted to work to support the grape growers and sort of pay them a living wage for the wines, for the grapes, sorry. And this is the fruit of those labors. And this wine was brought out to show what's great about Priorat, and also support the people who have been growing the grapes here forever. I think it's a really great representation of what Grenache and Carignan do really well together. But Albert, I think you're watching. I want you to explain why this is called Idus, which means Ides. It's in the Ides of March, because this story I've never actually gotten fully straight. I don't want to get it wrong. So Albert, you need to pop up there if you're out there, or you're gonna shy away.
Albert Costa?
Is he around, or did he go hide? Okay, well, there he is.
In a minute. You need to okay the video. Albert, you with us? Say something. No, his microphone's on, but
we can just
maybe it's the connection.
Yeah. Can I hear you? Okay, we'll come back to. Oh wait,
Must
there
be
we go.
Alberto's.
I'm with you now.
Alberto's mic's on mute.
He's walking.
Nah, he's there.
It's on
Hey,
mute.
hey, Michael. Hello.
Yeah.
Hey, Idus means the Ides of March. Yeah, you were right.
But why do you call it the Ides of March? What is the
We call
reason
the
behind
Ides of
this?
March. We call the Ides of March because it's the 15th of March when the winemakers and the owners will go together to make the blending of the wines. With the Ides of March,
Okay.
and that's the reason that we call it. And 2017, what you are drinking now, it's mainly Carignan. It's 90% Carignan and 10% Grenache.
Ah, okay. It changed quite a bit. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it has nothing to do with the fact that the middle of March is actually a very difficult time for grape growing, because you can have frost, you can have hail. So, this whole beware the Ides of March, it has no, that wasn't the reason behind it. It was just because you guys met and said like, okay, this is when we're making this wine.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
that's the thing. Yeah.
Well, there we go. All right. Thank you, Albert.
Thank you, Michael.
From Priorat, just over the hill.
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, it's very interesting. So he's shifted up the blend quite a bit to be predominantly Carignana, because that's actually a really interesting point, that the village of Priorat is really associated with being very nice village for Carignana. I would actually say it's a pretty nice village for grapes in general. The Grenache from there is really stupendous as well, because you get a great acidity because it's the village that's closest to the sea, and so you get this amazing a bit of fog that comes in just in the evening, and it really cools the place down. In August, you can be at 30, 35 during the day, and when you go out at night, you need to have a hoodie on because it just chills off tremendously, and so it really preserves the acidity very well in Priorat. And on the other side, people will then say that like Gratiopes is the Garnacha village, but again, I mean, it's a hotter, warmer village, which actually suits Carignana really well. And that's why you find like down in Montsant, you find that most of their Carignana village vineyards are planted southwest, which is like pretty much the hottest you can do. This is maybe going to be a bit difficult with global warming coming in, But, you know, this was how it was traditionally done because Cariñena takes really well to heat. Albert invited me down to a project he's doing in Morocco. And there they have vines where there's this wind that comes through off the Sahara and it gets up to 60 degrees centigrade, you know, 60 degrees Celsius, which is insane. But the vines survive, you know, as I was just super hardy old vines and they do okay. So Cariñena is a survivor, you know, it does really well. And the more, it's a bit tough because the more you make it suffer, the more it reduces its yields and the better it gets to be. Because if you don't control Cariñena, it will produce about 3.5 times the legal limit of Priorat. It can produce 20,000 kilos per hectare, that's a lot of grapes, you know. That's intense. So, and that's one of the reasons that there was definitely a generation of drinker, I think maybe more in the UK. Doesn't ring too many bells in the US, which Cariñena has a clean slate. But some people knew Cariñena or Carignan to be pretty shitty because if you're not controlling the yields, you're going to get a wine with kind of some scratchy, ugly tannins, a lot of acidity, and just pretty thin, you know. So that doesn't sound like anything I really want to drink. And so, but it's cheap because it produces tons, and so that was the problem. It got a bit of a bad reputation being produced, mainly up in Languedoc. So thank you for that, Languedoc. We're trying to fix this and get things better. I think it's going to take off, though. I think it's going to be a tremendous grade. It got on a recent episode of Stumptown, which is a series in the U.S. set in Portland, Oregon. There was a name drop on Carignan. They actually said, do you want to come over for a glass of Carignan? That's tremendous because we went from people thinking it's the same as Carmenere from, primarily done monovarietal at Chile to actually someone saying Carignan. And that's huge, huge. So we'll see where the grape grows from here. But I freaking love it. It's such a delicious grape. But we can move on unless anybody had any questions or wanted to hear me say more stupid things about Carignan.
I just wanted to ask, with global warming, we all like the acidity of Carignan, but do the wines age so well when they've in the hotter years? Because I know Carignan in Israel doesn't seem to age quite as well, I don't think, as in Languedoc and in Spain, and maybe because it's hotter.
Well, I don't know what exact temperatures they're getting to in Israel during the summer. I mean, I know they are picking a lot earlier because of that, and usually the red harvest is done by the end of August or something like that over there.
Yeah.
But I think it depends a lot upon the site and a lot upon the region that it's growing in. Priorat and Empordà, we both have the advantage of this cooling ocean breeze that comes in the evening, so it really drops the temperature. Whereas, that's the irony of it. It's called Carignan or Cariñena because it's thought to be from the town of Cariñena, which is just a bit to the west in Aragon. But they grow almost none of it there. And probably the reason is that that's a pretty hot region. It doesn't cool off at night. It's not particularly ideal for Cariñena production. But it is a bit fickle. It needs a nice site. It needs a good place to grow. And you can't go too high in altitude with it, but at the same time, you need a little bit of cooling. But then you don't need too much, or then it doesn't fully ripe because it still needs that heat. I mean, it's kind of a pain in the ass that way. But when everything works and everything, all the pieces come together and it's all framed in, we've got a pretty tremendous grape right there. I think another region to watch besides Maule, which they make a completely different version of Cariñena down there, is right next to San Francisco, oddly enough, in Contra Costa County. There are some old vineyards there from the gold rush period, and they have this perfect conditions of poor soils. It's sandy, it's not slate, but it's very reduced production. And in the evening you get this fog that comes in off the Pacific Ocean, and so it cools it and it preserves the acidity. And not everybody really understands how to work with Cariñena. Then I've tasted some of their, let's say I think the technical term is shitty, but there are some that are really, really good, and they understand what the grape is, and it needs to ripen a long time. So in Israel, I don't know. I mean, I've had, I think, maybe 2 Cariñenas or 3 from Israel, and they've all been quite good, but I mean, I've not had every vintage over there, so I can't speak as to whether, it's an ideal grape for Israel. I mean, they planted it there for the same reason that it was all over the Languedoc. They wanted big production. They wanted stuff to ramp up. They wanted to be able to actually produce wine. Thanks to Mr. Chiab, who brought in wine production. So I hope that answers your question.
Yep. Good.
Okay. Good. So what else we have? What's going to enjoy a bit more reputation within Spain? Yeah. Okay. So Alberto has asked. That's kind of a political question. I didn't really want to get into these too much. It's not easy for wineries in Catalonia to be selling their wines in the rest of Spain at the moment. There are two sides to this. It's not just the political issue and the independence and these, kind of fuck Catalonia kind of thing. There's some of that, sure, but I think in general in Spain, we're finally seeing kind of more of a revolution like we're seeing like France has. I mean, I was studying for sommelier exams with a fellow who lived in Bordeaux, and I'm so, that's fantastic. You live in Bordeaux, you have access to everything. He goes, yeah, sure, if it's from Bordeaux. Because it's, France is very, very regional. It's hard to find things from outside the region. And Spain is getting more like that as well. Catalonia had tons and tons of wines from Rioja. It was the main wine that you found in Catalonia. And now finally Catalan wines are the main wines you find in Catalonia. And each region in Spain is getting more about that, more of the drink local kind of ideas. So most wineries in Catalonia don't sell too much in the rest of Spain, and Priorat even less. But Priorat, it gets to be less of a regional issue and more of a money issue because these wines, they're not cheap. By the time you get over to somewhere like Madrid or something, it's 20 euros in a shop. And that's a bit more what people are accustomed to paying for a wine. They'll pay 25 or 30 or something for a Grand Reserve from Rioja for a special occasion, but that's kind of about it. And so I think that it's tough to sell the wines in Spain. As far as I heard, I mean, this is the figure I've heard bandied about. I don't know if there are too many official figures on it, but about 85% of production of Priorat is sold outside of Spain. So, and of that 15% that's left, I think, 12% or something is sold in Catalonia. There's maybe only 3% that's sold in the rest of Spain. So most people are focusing their efforts on selling outside. And this is why the financial crisis in 2008, 2009 was so difficult for the region, because your distribution channels kind of collapsed. So, that was pretty tough. So let's see, comparing so we have a question about 2013 and 2015 vintages, which would be a winner in general for your wines, and talk about later ones, 2016, 2019. Okay, so yeah, let me get back on vintages. I'll kind of address that with the other things that are going to get a bit more technical. So anybody who wants to hang around for that stuff is maybe it's going to be a bit more of a nerd session. And we can get on to the final wine, which is the San Antonio from Scala. So this is from their Las Garnachas line. These are single vineyard, 100% Grenache wines, grown at altitude up and around Scala, which, if you remember the map, is up in the northern part of Priorat. So this is an interesting project, and I think Ricard Vrofas, who's the winemaker, he has a really good habit of kind of leaving whatever winery he's been to in better shape than he found it. He's been at Scala for I think 13 years. It came in 2007, and he's really done a bang-up job of taking what was one of the oldest, if not the oldest, wineries in Priorat that was making nice wines, but he's taken it and kind of raised it up to a new level. So Scala, their big kind of moment where they popped onto the scene was in 1974. They've been producing wine longer than that, but 74 was the moment where this woman named Asuncion Peyram and an enologist, local enologist, she teamed up with him to produce a wine that would actually showcase Priorat and show what Priorat was capable of. And I never met her, but she sounds like a super cool character, because she would just kind of cruise around Priorat on a moto. She was wearing pants back when women weren't really wearing pants in Spain. And she had a lot of opinions, which not everybody agreed with, but they've turned out to be pretty much right. And she actually had some ideas on enoturism, which also have been proven right as well. So but she got the winery together, and they released this 1974 vintage called La Cartocha. This is what a lot of people sort of realized was possible in Priorat. You know, it's not for sure, but it probably is what brought that group who came in the 80s and started producing good wine. It's definitely what brought in Christopher Cannon, who owns Close Figueres. He's said that story that he really, you know, that's the wine that brought him to the region. And so, you know, that really, I think that wine brought a lot of people to the region, showed them the potential of what Priorat could do. And a lot of people have worked to strive to do that. So Ricard, he initially was working on making Cartocha, the modern Cartocha, more like the old Cartocha. So he moved it from coming out of smaller barrels into bigger barrels, making it just Grenache and Carignan, which is the original blend, using stems, which is something that's come back in Priorat. This puppy right here, apparently he uses 100% stems in these. I was not aware of that until last week, but that's, you know, there's not many people doing that here, but he says it's working really well. So I think, you know, it's a pretty unique wine. What has Paul got there? Paul has Scala de Priorat. Yeah, he's got one of the original labels right there. So well done. Is it a 74 or is it the 76? Yeah, I'm very upset with you guys because you didn't make a 77, which is my birth year. You didn't make a 78, which is my wife's birth year. So we'll forgive you. So anyways, that's a pretty monumental wine. They used to sell it in the winery up until a few years ago because there's only 100 bottles left or something. But really, really excellent wine. And the modern day Cartocha is really excellent. But Ricard, he kind of felt that he needed a bit more challenge on that. And it represents, I think what Ricard is doing is what a lot of other people are doing, is what Palacios is doing with Ermita, is what Sarah is doing with Elsa's Croissants. It's that they're working towards making a fresher wine. And how do you go about that with Priorat? How do you get a fresher wine when you've got Garnacha that wants to, you know, base up to 18% of alcohol? You plant high altitudes, poor soils, ideally north facing. And so that's often what most of the vineyards are at. These vineyards for the Garnacha series are all, I think it started about 600 meters and one of them goes up to about 800. So that's pretty high, especially in Priorat. And again, they're on poor soils, not on slate, interestingly. I think this one's on limestone and, yeah, it's just argila, so it's just limestone. It's on clay, sorry, clay, thank you. So it represents a very different take on Priorat. And there's more of these wines coming out. I think it's more of the future of Priorat. It shows what Priorat is capable of. It's not just a big boozy alcoholic kind of wine, you know, from these Mediterranean grapes. There's a lot of delicacy to it. There's a lot of nuance. These wines that they're producing, these Garnachas, as well as some other wines in the region, are much more subtle. Like these, I find, they have a lot of kind of rose petal components to them. They age really, really well. So anybody who says that Grenache can't age can seriously go fuck off, because it's, I mean, it really does very well. This is a 14, and this wine is just starting to come into its own. This was, again, this is what I was saying, is this is sort of the year that sort of the white wines, you know, took off in the region. But the reds, it was a bit of a difficult year because, you know, you didn't reach a lot of full maturity. So if you had lower altitude wines, you know, it was a bit of a mixed bag. But the wines that came out, that were top wines, are doing really well. And this one is one of them. I remember Paul opened a bottle of this in the tasting room for me once. I was just like, God, you know, I didn't like it when I first tasted it maybe 3 years ago, and now it's just stupendous. That's good juice. I mean, yeah, it's 14.5% alcohol, which, you know, that's a challenge for Garnacha. And it's not just about picking early. A lot of people think like, oh, you just pick early and then everything is done. You know, you've got it all set. You know, that's it. You just kind of throw some stems in it, let it go. Like, no, what happens if you pick too early with the Garnacha here is you lose this kind of width on the palate. You lose that sort of, that depth that Garnacha should have, but doesn't always, because it's not necessarily a grape that favors it. Carignan, on the other hand, will often have that. It really has a lot of mid-palate. It really is nice and fat in the mouth, which is why the two wines are so great when they're blended. The two grapes are great when they're blended together. So this is, I mean, this is it's an excellent example of what Garnacha can do. It's an example of what Priorat can do. And it's an excellent example of kind of where the future of Priorat is. And the only problem with this wine is you can only buy it in the cellar. because it's very limited production, less than 1,000 bottles. And they have, I think it's 3 of them at the moment that they're producing. There was 4, but now I think it's just 3 that they're producing. So really stupendous wine. I love this wine, tasting it. Masteo is even higher altitude. A bit of that goes into their Carcosa wine as well. It's a bigger vineyard, but it's really amazing vineyard. I went up there with Paul once, and because we have this big cliff at the top of Priorat, which is called the Mont Saint, which is the Mont Saint takes its name from that. And these vineyards are just right at the edge, and you go up to the edge, and you're going to fall down, and that's going to be the end of you. The more wine. That's good. That too, we'll be seeing some drinking later. So, yeah, I'm being told it's not a cliff, it's a bluff. This is true. It's actually a massif. I guess it would be the technical term for it. So, so those are the wines, kind of encapsulating sort of an old version of Priorat with a strong barrel aging, a bit more alcoholic, kind of a bit more forceful shoulder wine. The current version of Priorat, which you see not just in the Idus, but you also see it in wines like the Salancas from Mas Doix. You see it in the Martinet Bru from Mas Martinet, and you see it in a number of other wines. And then you also see this sort of future version of Priorat, which is sort of fresher, more acidity, lighter alcohol, and wines that can still age. It's not just this idea that we have to throw it in a barrel for 18 months or to age. Thankfully, that thinking has kind of gone out the window. And I think it'll be sort of the same thing in Rioja with time as well. You here in Priorat, you give it the barrel that you need to give it. And I was talking with Dominic Huber of Terroir Limit, which if you know Terroir Limit, they're sort of at the forefront of really kind of pushing the idea of freshness. And he told me that their idea in the near future is getting rid of all oak barrels out of the winery. So just cement aging. They're just really going full tilt with cement, which is super ironic because obviously 100 years ago, everything in the cooperatives was aged in cement. So now we've kind of come back circle with that. So, that's, those are the wines in general. Moshe, someone asked about the vintages. Should I maybe address that briefly?
Yes, there was also a question about where do you see the style going, but I think Elia was asking that before about where do you think the style is heading to? Well, I know it's a big question.
It's a big question because the style is always changing. I think there's a great phrase in Catalan, which is "cul inquiet," which basically means restless ass. I think it defines most of the winemakers here. If anybody's worth their salt in terms of winemaking, they're always trying things, they're always experimenting. Ricard, for example, with I think it was 2 vintages ago, he experimented with some Merlot and doing this thing called force pruning, which is you prune the Merlot in this way, you prune any vine, but he did that with the Merlot, pruned it in a certain way to push the full ripening of it about 2 months out. And so they were actually picking it in November. And the idea was to kind of get the alcohol down on the wine. And he said, well, the great thing is we got the alcohol down. It went down from 15 or 15.5 down to 13.5. So the alcohol was down. The problem was it had no body to it. It had nothing happening. So, and then they ended up regrafting the Merlot to Garnacha in the end. So Grenache won again. But there's always a lot of experimentation. Starting maybe about 8 years ago, people were experimenting with clay amphoras. There's been a bit of glass demijohn. Cement has gotten really popular. Big giant barrels have really foods have really become the main aging vessel these days. Small oak is, you don't see it too much. I think like Scala, they've got a lot of big barrels in there. They age their top cuvées in those or just in cement. Mas Alta as well has done a really good job of bringing in some larger aging vessels, again also using cement. Mas Martinet, big barrels, cement, or clay or glass. I don't think Mas Martinet has any stainless steel in it anywhere. So these have been the changes. The style has basically been I think largely due to the realization after the financial crisis that why are we making wines that taste like Australian Shiraz? Why are we making wines that taste like Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon? It's just barrel. It's just, you just taste heavy extraction in barrel, and there's nothing unique about it. And we got to go back to the drawing board and find out, what we got some balls to the wall terroir here. These rocks, not a lot of people have these kinds of rocks for soil. So how are we going to transmit this more in the wines? And you see this in Priorat You also see it heavily in Monsanto as well, because Monsanto, there's a lot of shared DNA between Priorat and Monsanto. A lot of people who have cellars in Priorat have cellars in Monsanto. Sarah and her husband Renee, they have a cellar at their home actually in Monsanto, which is making some really exciting wines. So there's been this idea of, sorry.
It's maybe the time to mention that we'll cover Monsanto. The idea is that we'll follow this with maybe a couple of sessions to cover specific growers in Priorat. I'm still working on it, and Sarah is probably coming on next week, and hopefully Miquel will be able to join us to guide us through it again. But and we'll definitely cover Monsanto as well, because it's also a fascinating side story.
Yeah, and Sharon was just asking about the glass demijohns that some people are using. The biggest size of those is going to be 54 liters. Any bigger than that, you start running into issues where they're going to crack on you. So yeah, it's pretty small scale stuff. I mean, 54 liters, you know, you're going to need, what, 6 of them to basically equal oak barrel. In glass aging, there are some old cooperatives, I think, over in like Hungary or something, that had some glass line tanks in them. So, you know, you do see it here and there in terms of the glass. But otherwise, yeah, using demijohns is small scale stuff. I mean, the Escorson's vineyard that they make with demijohns is, I don't even know, maybe 1,000 bottles, 1,200 bottles or something. So it's a pretty small scale production. Although they are using them in some of the other ones as well. But let's see, high alcohol never has a substance minerality. Yeah, there's it's interesting with Priorat, because like Miguel was talking about the fact that, you know, like for instance, the Idus here, that's 15.5% alcohol. Now, if you were analyzing this in blind tasting, you're going to probably know it's 15.5%. But in terms of drinking it, I had a wine from Napa Valley about 2 weeks ago that claimed to be 14.7. When drinking it, I'm sure it was about 16, and it tasted it. It just was all just booze. Priorat, it's a very weird place, because despite the fact that the alcohols are you know, high, you know, in all educational indexes, this is high alcohol. They don't really give a sensation of kind of burning hot alcohol. There is this, I don't know, balance of it, whether it's because of the slate, whether it's because of using stems that kind of like suck off a little bit of the sensation of alcohol. I've heard that as well. Or who knows, you know, it's the French concept of terroir, you know, it's just, it is what it is. And the wines, they don't taste as alcoholic as they actually are. And I've found, you know, with all the people I've done tastings with, this is usually the case. So, so we'll talk about vintages maybe briefly.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
So someone's asking about 13 versus 15. Well, those are both good vintages. It just depends on the time of when you want to drink them. 15 was a lot like what you found in southern France and a lot of other places, I think Italy to a certain extent. Warmer vintage, nice in terms of overall profile, little lacking in acidity. So they're not going to really be wines to age. I would probably say a 15 would be something to kind of be drinking about now. Again, it depends upon the vineyard. You know, some are higher altitudes, some have higher acidity, but in general, 15 is something to drink now. 13, I probably wouldn't crack open until probably another 3 years. While Paul's also saying that there's single variety wines from 15 are still bottle aging, which, you know, again, higher altitude wines are going to have more acidity from 15s. But that would be probably the two big differences between them. Is that the 13s are 13 was more of a classic vintage. You've got good acidity, good structure, and 13 is definitely something to age, much as 16 and also 19. So, and someone's asking about 12. 12 is tricky. Definitely drink it sooner rather than later. And 11 even more so. 12 was a very hot year. If you like your wines very fruit forward and a little bit kind of more kind of fig notes and kind of bigger dark fruits, you're going to find that more in 12. So they can have a little bit more alcohol. Again, not everybody made the style in 12, so it depends a lot upon producers. Yep.
Whoever asked about vintage asked also about comparison between the 13 and 15 to the more recent 16. I think they mentioned 17, but if you can, more immediate, closer vintages.
Yeah, so now we're about 4 months here, almost 5 months into 2020. We've had a very wet spring, which always is good. as long as it cuts off at some point. We don't know what the year holds, obviously, and on so many fronts. 19 was freaking great. That was a super good classic vintage, which is weird because nobody was thinking it was going to go that way. Everybody thought it was going to be a drier, hotter vintage because you're getting the, Paul saying 19 was awesome. I think that's pretty much the main tasting note of 19. 19 was awesome, not just in Priorat, but also Penedès and all over Catalonia, I think down to Valencia and also up into Languedoc-Roussillon and Southern Rhone as well. Really super vintage. We did have this crazy heat wave that came in June, and we had 3 days that were over 40 degrees. Well, 3 days were over 40 degrees. It was brutal. I was just baking in my house because I don't have air conditioning, because in theory you don't need it here because of the cooling evening breeze. Let me tell you, the evening breeze wasn't freaking working during 19 because it was hot, and it stayed hot at nights. But everybody who was a viticulturist, I was talking with people about it, and they were saying that, you know, it's the weirdest thing because we expect to see shriveled grapes, we expect to see problems, we taste the grapes, we're expecting to see kind of like, you know, hot vintage, but we're not seeing it. Somehow 19 came out fantastic. It's just delicious wines already. They're tasting great. The young wines are fantastic from 19, and the aged wines are going to be great as well. 18 is a bit strange. It was hot and humid, and it depends on what village you're in. I actually have a big pile of 2018s from Montsant to taste, and most of Montsant is in a hotter region. The hotter regions seem to do better in 18. Like Gratiopes saw a pretty good 18. Daphne Glorian of Close Erasmus, saying her 18 of Erasmus, she's ecstatic with. Whereas in Priorat, which is, you know, just on the other side of the county, people aren't making their top cuvées because they had a lot of rot problems and it didn't really fully ripen. So 18 it's a good bits and there's some bad bits. You never know what's up with 18. Hey, bye Patrick, thanks for showing up. And the 17 is a good vintage, is a great vintage, more fruit forward, very much ready to drink now, and in a way that's a bit different than 15. It's kind of got a good balance, but it's probably won't age as long, but it's a great vintage. And 16 again was a lot like 19 and 13, really super vintages. So if you're just going to randomly pick a Priorat off the shelf, when the 19s come on the market, those are great. 17, 16, or if you want something to drink now, 15 as well. Or a white, if you can find a 14, grab it because they're so good. So
I don't know why nobody asked about it, but why there's no rosé production?
What?
I'm curious why nobody mentioned the word rosé so far.
Rosé. Well,
I was being good.
Yes. Be careful how you answer.
So rosé in Priorat has a checkered past. It was made kind of in a similar fashion as what you see across most of Spain. And, you know, it was kind of this thing of kind of halfway between Provençal and, I don't know, sort of a normal red. I don't really know what it was supposed to be. I mean, in Catalan, there's the phrase of ni peix ni carn, which is ni carn ni peix, sorry. And it's like neither meat nor fish. You know, it's like it doesn't really know which way it wants to be in. But recently, in the last couple of years, actually starting in 14, there comes 14 again. Scala, and Paul was mentioning in the comments, but the Scala Pla dels Àngels, outstanding. I mean, it's a lighter style rosé, 100% Grenache from a single vineyard. And there he is, he's putting it up. So if you want to show people if you want to click over to Paul so people can see what it looks like.
Say something, Paul. Just a minute, he's muted. I'll unmute you so you can tell us.
Okay, here you go. Not sure if you can see that.
Yeah, Scala Day.
That's our 2019 Pla dels Àngels, 100% rosé. Exceptional. It's a wine that we started making 2014, if I remember correctly, was the first vintage. It's 100% Grenache. It's a wine from clay soil, high altitude, 600 meters. It's a wine that has just it's between 4 and 8 hours contact with the skin, 14% alcohol. We make it really as a summer wine. It's a limited production. We make just 6,000 bottles.
It's a good number for experimental.
Experimental, interesting word.
No, it's a good production. What is the total production that did you have to lose in a way? I'm sorry to call it lose, but Liz will tell me off. But some of your obviously grapes that you may as well use for red to make that rosé.
Yes, we decided that to make the rosé, the vines that we use to make the rosé, we work differently. So the vines are pruned differently. We leave quite a lot more leaf on the vine, a lot more coverage. It's not affected the production of the reds. We've not reduced the production of the reds. From the vineyard that this wine comes from, we make two wines. We make the rosé, and we also make a blanc de noir. So from that vineyard, we're making a total of 7,000 bottles. In total at Scala, we're making an average of between 150 and 2,000 bottles. So we're one of the bigger producers in the Priorat.
And Blanc de Noir is also Grenache 100%, or do you use some Carignan as well?
No, 100% Grenache. The Blanc de Noir is 100% Grenache.
It's interesting. Is it spicy? Can you describe the wine?
Oh, that's a good question. The Blanc de Noir initially is quite floral, and then it changes, and it's tropical fruits. So you find quite a lot of pineapple, banana. It's sort of more white fruits in the Blanc de Noir. Miguel, your opinion on the Blanc de Noir?
So the Blanc de Noir is a curious project. I mean, it started off kind of as sort of a diversion. I mean, again, you know, Ricard is one of these guys who's always trying stuff. And so the Blanc de Noir came about because there's just really not enough white grapes in Priorat, and so they're trying to make this. There's another producer who's doing it as well, and it's been different every year. I think there has been years where it is very, very close to what you find with Garnacha Blanca in Terra Alta, which they have a ton of white Grenache down there, and so that they have 1/3 of all the vineyards of white Grenache in the world are in Terra Alta, so they take it very seriously. And they do a very nice job with it as well. But some years have been, some years with this Blanc de Noir, it's been more orchard fruit leaning. But yeah, there's definitely kind of a tropical element to it. I think Ricard is constantly experimenting with it and trying things. It's definitely a tough thing to kind of pull off doing from this specific grape, because Grenache is very oxidative. And the minute you sort of get it away from its protective skins, it's going to really kind of go wonky on you. So every year has been very, very different. Again, you know, come down to Priorat, come visit the cellar. Scala is open pretty much all the time. I think you guys are closed 2 days out of the whole year. So
yeah, more or less.
If you want to go drop off anywhere, you know, just drop on somewhere and do a tasting, I think it's a really good option. So that's really quite stellar. I did want to mention that in addition to the Los Angeles, there's another really good rosé, which is even smaller production, which is made by Albert Costa at Vineyard. It's a small project that's sort of part of the whole theme of their kind of being part of the community and really being embedded in the village, which is the Donas de Porrera. They make 3 wines named after 3 women in the village. Unfortunately, one of them just died, who actually happened to be my neighbor when I lived in Porrera. Died at 104, basically said that she drank wine every day and took an aspirin, and she did pretty well. She was doing all right to the end there. And you know, it's a great rosé because it's made again with a base of Grenache. It's made in a lighter style. It's made in an amphora. So that's a really nice wine, but it's only, I think, 700 bottles or something like this. So it's you know, that's pretty much it. I don't know if we want to talk more about some of the wines, or do we want? I mean, we got it's 9:15. I mean,
yes, we've been here for 1:40, but yeah. So to wrap it up, I just wanted you do you're doing a great job promoting the region anyway, and we will hopefully see you in the coming weeks with the winemakers, etc. But just to mention that next week, the first week of May, was supposed to be the big celebration of in the region, and normally I think it's probably the first year it's been cancelled. Correct me if I'm wrong.
This would have been the 20th year, and I think it's the first. Yeah, it's the first time it's been canceled. It's really, it's a big. The theater that'll be. Yeah, it would have started actually. It's this weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, with a professional day on Monday. Sadly, big hit to the region, big hit to the hotels and the restaurants because there's thousands of people who come here. It's one of the only times you can actually come to Priorat and find people. So you know, that's pretty much. That's pretty much, you know, what it is. You know, everything else has been canceled. I was supposed to be in Burgundy this year. That got canceled. I was supposed to be on Premiere. That got canceled. So that's the theme of 2020, return to sender.
So is there a plan to just postpone it, or is it skipping this year?
They're skipping this year because it's tied into a couple of the village saint parties. And so it's just postponing it doesn't work. And nobody knows when to postpone it to. That's the other problem, you know. So they're just planning to do it next year.
And I will just tie with what I said before about the 2008 crisis, just to ask you if you think that makes a difference to the COVID crisis. Now, obviously, there's social media and there's ways sellers, wineries communicate directly with their fans or consumers. Do you think that can make a difference? Do you think that should be used by wineries or even by the whole DOQ to communicate and to reach out?
I mean, this DOQ, you know, it doesn't do a lot of. It's not as active as say like DO Monsant. So, you know, they're on Twitter, they do Instagram, they do press announcements. But doing something kind of more virtual like this is. You know, not something I don't know that they would necessarily continue. And a lot of the DOs in Catalonia in general have they've kind of come into it a bit late because it threw everybody by surprise. I think that it's one of many tools that can be used to kind of promote wines in the future. But you know, I mean, the truth of it is that to understand wine, you got to kind of come to the region. You've got to. I mean, at the very least, you have to taste the wines. I mean, you're not going to buy some wine without tasting it or without someone who you trust having tasted it before. So that's still a key part of it. There's a physical thing in there, and I've gotten in a lot of very big flame wars on Twitter and such because you know there's these people who want to really push the agenda that you know social media sells wine. I'm like, well, you know, it's one thing. It's not a bad thing, but you know the fact of it is that wine is a consumable. It's something you have to taste, something you have to get, you know. Sure, we're buying groceries online now and having them sent to us, so you know maybe there's some changes afoot, but it's you know, it's I don't know. Again, it's not something that people should ignore, but at the same time, before really investing in kind of virtual chats or social media stuff, there's a lot of wine that should just have goddamn websites, you know, and that's sort of key, you know, a website. Or if you're in France, not having a wanadoo.fr address, you know, for your email, you know, that I think if I see one of those, it's in France. I don't need to know by the domain. So, you know, it's just all kind of a multi-pronged attack, you know. And this is the same thing looking back at 2008 is that probably there were not everyone, but there were a number of producers who were too reliant upon a single distribution channel, like say selling most all their wines to the United States. And then that just kind of, you know, just kind of went like that. And so they had to diversify. We're seeing that again with what's happening now, where there's almost nowhere to sell wine, you know, except through mail order and such. And so it's a kind of a different approach to diversification. And we'll see, you know, we'll see where it goes. We'll see what people take away from this. Is everybody still going to be baking bread and sharing it on Instagram in a year? I hope not. That way, mine will shine more. You know, I want some more protagonism to my bread. But you know, who knows? Who knows where we're going to be in a year? I think 2020 is just sort of about surviving it, not losing your trousers. To answer Sharon's question about trousers versus pants, and just kind of you know, I don't know, getting through it as best we can. And that's that's about all we got. Taking it 1 month at a time. Harvest is coming. You know?
Absolutely. As a friend of mine from Israel saying through this crisis, no matter what, a harvest will happen.
Yeah.
The harvest will come and the harvest will happen. So
Yeah.
I want to thank you. If last chance, if anybody wants to ask something, now it's your chance. I just will mention that this session will be it is recorded. It will be available on Miquel's platforms and Vinolog and Hudin.com. It will be available on my podcast in the Vineyard with, and I will, of course, update you about next week's session. I'm sorry, there's no definite date already, but it will probably be quite early next week if I manage to convince Sarah to come on.
Yeah, I just and let me just add one quick thing before saying goodbye. That a number of people have asked about talking about the zones or the parachas and all these things. We just don't have time to get into that, unfortunately, and that's another whole discussion. On my website, there is quite a bit about that. I've been writing about it since they came out and even before. So you can go to hudin.com, hudin.com, and you can find a bit there about this. So anyways, thank you very much, Moshe. It's been, I think we've had a good chat with some people. Some of them are nearly my neighbors and other people I know very well. So it's been very enjoyable.
We had people from as far as the Caribbean, Israel, Amalfi Coast, France. I'm sorry if I forgot somebody here, but and England, of course. So thank you, Miquel, and thank you, everybody. I hope you're all safe, and hopefully see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.